The entire boardroom went silent when Billionaire CEO Adrian Hayes suddenly stopped a $10 million meeting, just to ask one question to the quiet black woman nobody had even bothered to introduce. Maya Carter had spent her whole life being treated like she didn't belong, ignored at family dinners, mocked for her dreams, and raised inside a wealthy white household that loved reminding her she should feel grateful to be there. At work, people stole her ideas. At home, they treated her more like hired help than family. But their biggest mistake was confusing silence with weakness, because the woman they humiliated for years was about to become the most powerful person in the room. And when her family discovered who she was secretly marrying, a luxury wedding turned into a public courtroom of guilt, lies, racism, and shame. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe some heroes are willing to look guilty to save the innocent, this story is for you. The Girl Who Never Belonged. Cold winter rain drifted across downtown Seattle, turning the streets silver beneath the glow of traffic lights and storefront signs. Wind swept through the city from Elliott Bay, carrying the sharp scent of salt water and wet concrete. On nights like this, most people hurried home to warmth, family, and comfort. Maya Carter drove toward a house that had never truly felt like any of those things. The Anderson estate stood in one of Seattle's wealthiest neighborhoods, hidden behind tall iron gates and rows of perfectly trimmed hedges dusted with rain. The white, three-story mansion looked like the kind of home people photographed for Christmas cards and luxury magazines. Beautiful from the outside, cold everywhere else. Maya parked quietly near the garage and sat in the car for a few extra seconds, staring at the warm lights glowing through the windows. 26 years old, tall and slender, dark brown skin that seemed almost bronze beneath the streetlights. Her face carried soft elegance mixed with constant exhaustion. High cheekbones, tired hazel brown eyes, and natural black curls tied loosely behind her head after a 14-hour shift. She wore a long charcoal coat over simple office clothes that were slightly wrinkled from sitting at a desk all day. People often described Maya as calm, but the truth was different. She had simply spent most of her life learning how to survive quietly. When Maya was 8 years old, she had entered the Anderson home holding a small backpack and a stuffed rabbit with one missing eye. She barely spoke for the first 3 months after being adopted. At first, Eleanor Anderson had smiled for cameras and charity events while introducing Maya as our new daughter. But over time, the word daughter slowly disappeared. Then, eventually, so did the warmth. Maya grabbed her laptop bag and stepped inside the house. The smell of roasted chicken and garlic drifted from the dining room. Dinner was almost over. Again, at the far end of the table sat Eleanor Anderson, 54 years old, tall, thin, perfectly composed. Her blonde hair was styled neatly above sharp features that rarely softened unless strangers were watching. Eleanor carried herself like a woman who spent her entire life protecting appearances. Years earlier, growing up in old-money Boston society had taught her that reputation mattered more than emotion. She smiled often in public, but almost never with sincerity at home. Beside her sat Richard Anderson, Maya's adoptive father, a broad-shouldered man in his early 60s with silver-gray hair and permanently tired eyes hidden behind reading glasses. Richard owned a struggling financial consulting company downtown. He wasn't openly cruel the way Eleanor could be. He was worse in a quieter way, indifferent. Across from them sat Sophia Anderson, 24, beautiful in the polished, social media perfect kind of way, long blonde hair, sharp jawline, blue eyes, constantly scanning her phone screen for notifications and attention. Sophia had grown up loved, protected, and praised her entire life, and it had slowly turned her into someone who measured human value by status and appearance. Her Instagram following mattered more to her than almost anything real. The only person who looked up when Maya entered was Ryan Anderson, 21 years old, tall, lean, messy brown hair falling over thoughtful eyes. Unlike the rest of the family, Ryan always seemed uncomfortable during moments that embarrassed Maya. He had inherited his father's silence, but not his emotional distance. Sometimes guilt showed on his face before he could hide it. Eleanor glanced toward Maya briefly. "You're late again." Maya removed her coat quietly. Traffic downtown was bad. Sophia smirked without looking away from her phone. Or maybe the assistant finally got promoted to CEO. Richard chuckled softly. Maya said nothing. She had learned years ago that defending herself only made things worse. Eleanor folded her napkin carefully. "There's food in the kitchen," she said, "and please clean the table after." The sentence sounded polite, almost gentle. That was always how Eleanor operated. Cruelty hidden inside manners. Maya nodded once. "Okay." As the family continued eating dessert, Maya quietly gathered empty plates from the table. Not one person offered to help her. Not even automatically, because somewhere over the years this arrangement had become normal. Sophia suddenly lifted her phone toward Maya. "Oh, wait," she said with fake excitement. "Stand over there for a second." Maya paused. Sophia snapped a picture, then laughed while typing something on her screen. A few seconds later, Ryan's expression darkened. "What did you post?" Sophia grinned. "Relax, it's funny." Ryan grabbed his phone and looked at the screen. His jaw tightened immediately. The photo showed Maya carrying dishes beside the dining table. Caption: "Some people are just naturally good at serving." A few laughing emojis followed. Richard ignored it. Eleanor sipped wine silently. Ryan looked furious. "Sophia, delete that." "Oh my God, stop acting dramatic. It's messed up." Sophia rolled her eyes. "She knows it's a joke." Maya gently took the last plate from the table. "It's fine," she said softly. But it wasn't. Ryan knew it wasn't. The worst part was how normal moments like this had become. Later that night, after cleaning the kitchen alone, Maya climbed the narrow staircase leading to the third-floor attic bedroom she had lived in since high school. The room was small, but carefully organized. A twin bed, books stacked everywhere, sticky notes covering the walls with branding ideas, consumer psychology concepts, marketing funnels, color theory, audience behavior patterns. This room contained the version of Maya nobody downstairs had ever cared enough to notice. She sat at her desk and opened her laptop. The glow from the screen reflected across her tired face. Her full-time job was at Brightbridge Media, a struggling boutique marketing agency in downtown Seattle. Officially, Maya was only a junior content assistant. Unofficially, she solved half the company's problems. Without credit, without recognition, without promotion. Earlier that day, Maya had overheard executives panicking because their biggest client, a regional coffee chain called North Stream Coffee, was preparing to leave for a larger agency. If that happened, Brightbridge might collapse within months. Layoffs would start immediately. Maya knew because she had accidentally heard the conversation while delivering presentation drafts upstairs. Most people in the office ignored her. That made it easier to overhear things. Her phone buzzed suddenly. A message from an anonymous business owner appeared. "Your campaign doubled our orders this week, thank you." Maya smiled faintly. For the past 2 years, she had secretly managed small business social media pages online under a fake freelancer name. Local bakeries, small clothing stores, coffee shops, pet groomers. Most of them didn't even know who she really was. She charged almost nothing, but little by little it helped her survive financially without depending on the Anderson family. Maya opened TikTok and stared thoughtfully at the empty editing screen. Then she remembered something she had noticed earlier downtown. A young woman sitting alone in a cafe, crying quietly while holding a North Stream coffee cup. Everyone around her ignored her, but when the elderly cashier walked outside and gave her a free refill, the woman suddenly smiled through tears. People don't remember products, they remember how products make them feel. Maya's fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. She began building a completely different marketing concept for North Stream Coffee. Not trendy, not flashy, human, simple shots, rain against cafe windows, lonely customers, quiet kindness. The feeling of warmth during hard days. Hours passed. The house downstairs went silent. At 1:47 a.m., Maya was still editing. At 2:03 a.m., she finally uploaded the short video draft privately to test engagement patterns. Then, exhaustion finally pulled her back against the chair. Her eyes slowly closed. Across the hall, Ryan quietly stepped upstairs carrying a glass of water. He stopped when he saw light beneath Maya's door. Carefully, he pushed it open slightly. Maya was asleep at the desk. Laptop still glowing. Video editing timeline frozen on screen. Ryan looked around the room slowly. At the walls, the books, the endless notes, all the evidence of effort nobody downstairs ever noticed. His expression changed. Not pity, shame. Because for the first time in a long time, Ryan realized something painful. Maya had spent years fighting for a future while everyone else in the house treated her like she was lucky just to exist there. He quietly placed the water beside her desk and left without waking her. Downstairs, the house remained silent. But upstairs, everything was beginning to change. At 2:31 a.m., Maya's phone suddenly exploded with notifications. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Her eyes snapped open in confusion. She grabbed the phone and froze. The private test video she had accidentally uploaded publicly instead of privately had already passed 50,000 views, then 80,000, then 100,000. Comments flooded the screen faster than she could read them. This made me cry. Who created this ad? This feels real. North Stream Coffee needs to hire this person immediately. Maya stared at the screen, heartbeat rising. Outside her attic window, cold Seattle rain continued falling across the sleeping city. But for the first time in years, something in Maya's life was finally being seen. The billionaire who noticed her. By 7 o'clock the next morning, Seattle was already talking about the video. Maya sat silently near the back corner of the crowded subway train, staring down at her phone while rain streaked across the windows beside her. The notifications still had not stopped. Overnight, the North Stream Coffee campaign video had exploded across TikTok, Instagram, and X. Large marketing pages were reposting it. Influencers were reacting to it. Some people even believed it had come from a $1 million agency in Los Angeles. Nobody knew the creator was a tired junior assistant riding public transportation in a wrinkled gray coat. Maya refreshed the page again. 2.8 million views. Her stomach tightened. Part of her felt excited. Another part felt terrified, because attention was dangerous when you spent your whole life trying not to be noticed. When she arrived at Brightbridge Media, the energy inside the office felt completely different from usual. Employees stood in groups whispering while checking their phones. The company's founder, Martin Keller, was practically shouting into his office headset. Martin Keller was a short, balding man in his late 50s with nervous energy permanently trapped inside his body. He had built Brightbridge 20 years earlier with ambition and instinct, but years of losing clients to larger agencies had turned him stressed and emotionally unpredictable. His expensive suits never fit correctly anymore because he was constantly losing and gaining weight from pressure. The second Maya walked into the office, dozens of eyes turned toward her. Then, suddenly, "Maya!" Martin rushed across the office floor toward her so quickly that one employee almost dropped a coffee cup in shock. "You made that video?" Maya blinked. Yes." Martin stared at her like he had never seen her before. "You didn't tell anybody?" "I wasn't trying to post it publicly." "Oh my God," he muttered, rubbing both hands over his face. "Do you understand what this means?" Before Maya could answer, another voice interrupted. "Well, technically," someone said smoothly, "the campaign was developed under Brightbridge property." The speaker was Vanessa Cole, 29 years old, tall, sharp-featured, perfectly dressed. Vanessa had the kind of beauty magazines loved. Sleek dark hair, expensive makeup, controlled smiles. But there was always something calculating behind her eyes. She had entered the marketing world after growing up poor in Phoenix, and years of fighting for recognition had slowly made her believe kindness was weakness. Vanessa was a senior strategist at Brightbridge, and she hated being overlooked, especially by someone younger. She crossed her arms while glancing toward Maya. If this goes to Hayes Digital, we should present it as a collaborative agency concept. Maya immediately understood what that meant. Vanessa wanted partial credit. Martin hesitated. The room grew awkwardly quiet. Then his phone rang. He looked at the screen and nearly stopped breathing. Everybody quiet. He answered instantly. Yes, this is Martin Keller." A long silence followed. Then, slowly, Martin's eyes widened. "Yes, absolutely. We'll be there." When the call ended, nobody moved. Martin looked around the room slowly before speaking. "That was Hayes Digital." The office exploded. No one needed further explanation. Hayes Digital wasn't just another tech company. It was one of the most powerful media corporations in America. Streaming platforms, AI marketing systems, advertising networks, digital analytics. Adrian Hayes had built an empire before turning 35, and unlike most billionaires, he rarely gave interviews. That mystery only made him more famous. Martin pointed directly at Maya. "They want a live pitch presentation tomorrow morning." Vanessa's expression immediately shifted. "They want the agency," she corrected carefully. Martin swallowed. "No, they specifically asked for the creator of the campaign." The room fell silent again. Vanessa forced a smile, but jealousy flashed visibly across her face. That night at the Anderson mansion, Sophia Anderson sat curled on the living room sofa, scrolling through Adrian Hayes' Instagram profile like she was studying for an exam. "Oh my God," she whispered. "He's actually insane rich." Her eyes widened at photos of penthouses, tech conferences, private yachts, and magazine covers. Sophia immediately clicked follow, then unfollowed, then followed again. Across the room, Eleanor looked up from her wine glass. "Who?" "Adrian Hayes," Sophia said, "the Billionaire CEO." Richard barely looked away from the television. "What about him?" "He's connected to Maya's company now." That finally got Eleanor's attention. Sophia smirked. "Apparently, Maya made some viral marketing video." Richard laughed once. "That girl got lucky." But Ryan, sitting quietly near the fireplace, noticed the tone immediately. Not pride, not happiness, just disbelief that Maya could matter to someone powerful. Sophia continued scrolling through Adrian's page. "He's probably dating models." Eleanor folded her arms lightly. "Men like that don't marry women like Maya." The sentence landed heavily in the room. Ryan looked up sharply. "What does that mean?" Eleanor sighed like she was tired of explaining obvious things. "It means successful people usually marry within their world." Ryan stared at her, then at Sophia, then at Richard. Nobody seemed bothered by what had just been said. For the first time in his life, Ryan began realizing how casually cruelty existed inside this family. Upstairs in her attic bedroom, Maya sat cross-legged on the floor surrounded by presentation notes. Her old golden retriever Jasper rested beside the bed. Jasper was nearly 11 years old now, with faded golden fur and cloudy brown eyes softened by age. Maya had rescued him from a shelter during college after someone abandoned him because of arthritis problems. Unlike people, Jasper never made Maya feel unwanted. She scratched gently behind his ears while reviewing campaign data. Her laptop suddenly buzzed with a new email notification. From Hayes Digital Executive Office. Her breathing slowed. The email was brief. "Tomorrow, 9 a.m., Hayes Digital Tower. Requested presenter, Maya Carter." She read the line 3 times, then quietly closed the laptop. Because somehow, that felt scarier than exciting. The next morning, downtown Seattle disappeared beneath gray fog and cold rain. Hayes Digital Tower rose above the financial district like glass and steel carved directly into the clouds. Inside, everything looked impossibly expensive. Black marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, silent elevators, employees walking quickly with the kind of confidence money creates. Maya suddenly became painfully aware of her simple navy blazer and worn heels. Vanessa leaned closer while they entered the elevator. "Just let me handle most of the speaking," she whispered. "These people expect polish." Maya nodded quietly. She was used to disappearing. The executive boardroom occupied the top floor. When the doors opened, Maya immediately noticed Adrian Hayes standing near the windows overlooking Seattle, 34 years old. Tall, lean, athletic build, dark tailored suit without a tie, short black hair brushed neatly away from sharp features. But what people remembered most about Adrian Hayes were his eyes. Cold, gray, focused. The eyes of someone who spent years observing people before speaking. Years earlier, Adrian had grown up in a cramped apartment in Brooklyn with a single mother working 3 jobs. Watching corporations manipulate public emotion while ordinary people struggled had shaped the obsession that later built his empire, understanding human behavior better than anyone else. Success had made him richer, not softer. The room filled quickly with executives and analysts. Everyone tried impressing Adrian immediately. Data projections, trend forecasting, consumer retention algorithms. Numbers flooded giant presentation screens for nearly 40 minutes. Adrian barely reacted once. No smile, no notes, nothing. Vanessa eventually stepped forward confidently to present Brightbridge's version of the campaign strategy. She spoke well, polished, controlled, but something felt rehearsed. Adrian looked bored within minutes. Then, finally, his eyes shifted toward Maya sitting quietly near the end of the table. "You're Maya Carter." Every head turned instantly. Maya froze slightly. "Yes." Adrian studied her for a moment, then leaned back slowly. "You haven't said anything." Vanessa quickly interrupted. Maya mainly assisted with, "I asked her." The room went completely silent. Maya felt her heartbeat rising. Adrian nodded once toward the screen. "Tell me why the video worked." No numbers, no charts. Just the question. Maya stood slowly. For a second, she almost sat back down again. Years of being ignored had trained her not to take up space, but then she remembered something. Nobody in this room knew her. Nobody here had already decided who she was. So, for the first time in a very long time. Maya spoke honestly. "People are exhausted," she said quietly. The room stayed still. "They're tired of advertisements pretending to understand them. Most companies sell products by trying to look perfect. But perfect doesn't feel real anymore." Adrian's expression changed slightly. Maya continued. "The video worked because it wasn't selling coffee. It was selling comfort, recognition, small moments where people don't feel invisible." Nobody interrupted her. Even Vanessa remained silent. Maya looked toward the rain outside the windows. "Lonely people don't remember branding language," she said softly. "They remember how something made them feel on their worst day." The boardroom became completely still. One executive slowly lowered his pen. Another stopped typing entirely. Adrian Hayes stared at Maya longer than was socially normal. Not because of attraction, because recognition had just happened. He knew that voice, not literally, emotionally. It was the exact same feeling he had while watching the viral video alone at 2 a.m. in his Manhattan penthouse. He had replayed it 5 times. Not because it was flashy, because it felt human. And now the woman standing in front of him felt exactly the same way. Real. Adrian finally spoke. "You made the video alone?" Maya hesitated briefly, then nodded. Vanessa's face tightened instantly. Adrian looked toward Martin Keller. "I want Maya Carter working directly with my campaign division." The room froze. Martin almost looked ready to faint. Vanessa stared in disbelief, and Maya herself could barely process the words. Adrian stood calmly and adjusted his suit jacket. Then, for the first time during the entire meeting, He smiled slightly. "Everyone else," he said, "was trying to impress me with data." His eyes returned to Maya. She was the only person in this room talking about people. And in that moment, without fully understanding why, Maya Carter stopped feeling invisible. The nights that changed everything. Seattle's rain had become almost constant by the middle of December. The city looked softer at night beneath glowing traffic lights and fog-covered skyscrapers, as if everything sharp during the day became quieter after midnight. Maya began noticing that most of her conversations with Adrian Hayes happened long after normal business hours, when the noise of the world disappeared and people stopped pretending to be impressive. 3 days after the Hayes digital meeting, Maya stepped into the private strategy floor of Hayes Tower for the first time. The atmosphere upstairs felt completely different from the crowded corporate levels below. There were no loud conversations, no employees rushing to impress executives, no oversized motivational slogans hanging on walls. Everything was calm, controlled, intentional. A woman named Claire Donovan greeted her near the security entrance. Claire was Adrian's executive operations manager, a tall Irish-American woman in her early 40s with sharp green eyes and dark auburn hair always tied into a low bun. Years earlier, Claire had worked in political communications in Washington before leaving after a public scandal destroyed several careers around her. Since then, she trusted competence more than charm and disliked arrogant people almost immediately. "You're the first junior employee Adrian's personally requested in 2 years," Claire said while handing Maya a temporary access badge. Maya blinked slightly. "Really?" Claire nodded once. "He usually hates meetings." That answer somehow made Maya more nervous instead of less. Most of the week passed in long brainstorming sessions. But unlike every corporate environment Maya had experienced before, Adrian never treated conversations like performances. He asked direct questions, listened carefully, interrupted only when something felt dishonest or artificial, and for the first time in her professional life, someone actually listened to Maya until she finished speaking. On Thursday night, they stayed at the office past midnight reviewing campaign drafts for a national emotional branding project Hayes Digital planned to launch the following spring. Large windows overlooked downtown Seattle glowing beneath cold rain, while soft jazz music played quietly somewhere in the background. Adrian leaned against the conference table, studying Maya carefully while she rearranged audience behavior notes across a touchscreen display. "You always focus on emotional memory first," he observed. Maya shrugged lightly. "People think they buy products because of logic. Most of the time they buy because they want to feel understood." Adrian crossed his arms slowly. "You say that like you've spent years watching people." Her fingers paused briefly against the screen. "I have." Something about the answer felt heavier than the words themselves. Adrian noticed. He always noticed. That was part of what made him dangerous in business. While most executives looked for confidence, Adrian watched hesitation, silence, emotional patterns, the things people accidentally revealed when trying not to reveal anything at all. Maya returned to organizing campaign concepts. "Most companies treat consumers like data points," she said quietly, "but lonely people react differently to the world." Adrian tilted his head slightly. "Lonely people?" She hesitated, then gave a small smile. "They notice things other people miss." For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. And strangely, the silence didn't feel uncomfortable. Later that night, Adrian drove Maya home himself after realizing every subway line near downtown had been delayed by storms. His black Aston Martin moved quietly through rain-covered Seattle streets while soft city lights reflected across the windshield. "You don't talk much about yourself," Adrian said calmly while driving. Maya looked out the window. "There's not much to say." "That's usually not true." She smiled faintly without answering. Adrian glanced toward her briefly before focusing back on the road. The more time he spent around Maya, the more he realized something unusual about her. She carried intelligence without arrogance, kindness without self-pity, But underneath all of it existed constant emotional caution, like someone who had learned very young that vulnerability could become dangerous. When they reached the Anderson estate, Maya immediately stiffened slightly. The giant house looked beautiful in the rain, but Adrian noticed the way her shoulders subtly tensed while staring at it. Interesting, he thought. Very interesting. Thank you for the ride, Maya said softly. Adrian nodded once. Get some sleep. She almost laughed at that. Sleep had never been easy for her. Inside the house, Sophia was waiting in the kitchen wearing silk pajamas while scrolling through her phone. The second Maya entered, Sophia suddenly smiled. An unusually warm smile. Hey, she said brightly. How was work? Maya paused immediately. This was new. Sophia walked closer. I saw Hayes Digital reposted your campaign today. That's amazing. Maya studied her carefully. Sophia rarely complimented anyone unless something benefited her directly. Thanks, Maya answered cautiously. Sophia leaned casually against the counter. So, Adrian Hayes, is he as attractive in person as people say? There it was. Maya quietly placed her laptop bag down. He's my boss, Sophia. Sophia laughed lightly. Relax, I'm just asking. Upstairs, Ryan overheard most of the conversation from the hallway. He also noticed something else. Sophia had never once shown interest in Maya's work before Adrian Hayes became involved. That realization irritated him more than expected. The next morning at Brightbridge Media, tension spread across the office almost immediately. Vanessa Cole walked into the conference room carrying printed campaign drafts with visible confidence. She had spent the last several days subtly presenting Maya's ideas as team contributions during internal meetings. Most employees noticed. Nobody challenged her. Corporate environments rewarded confidence more often than honesty. During the meeting, Martin Keller excitedly announced that Hayes Digital wanted further collaboration with Brightbridge. The room erupted with nervous excitement. Then Vanessa smiled toward Maya across the table. Maya actually learned a lot from our senior staff during this process, she said smoothly. Maya looked up slowly. That sentence sounded harmless, but everyone in the room understood the implication. Vanessa was rewriting the story, trying to position Maya as inexperienced instead of talented. Before Maya could respond, another voice interrupted. Actually, said Daniel Cho quietly from the corner of the room, the campaign was Maya's idea from the beginning. Every head turned. Daniel Cho was one of Brightbridge's graphic designers, a thin Korean-American man in his early 30s with glasses constantly sliding down his nose and permanent exhaustion in his eyes. Daniel rarely involved himself in office conflict after years of being ignored by louder personalities, which made his interruption shocking. Vanessa's smile faded instantly. Daniel adjusted his glasses nervously. Everybody knows that. Silence spread awkwardly across the room. For the first time since joining Brightbridge, someone had publicly defended Maya. Vanessa said nothing else for the remainder of the meeting. That evening, Ryan sat downstairs in the Anderson study while Richard and Eleanor discussed Maya privately, believing nobody else could hear them. Richard loosened his tie tiredly. This Hayes situation is getting exaggerated. Eleanor nodded. Exactly. Sophia said people online are acting like Maya's some kind of genius now. Richard scoffed softly. One lucky video doesn't change who someone is. Then Eleanor quietly added the sentence Ryan never forgot. She'll never truly belong in circles like theirs. Ryan froze. Something inside him shifted painfully, because for years he had stayed silent, believing silence kept peace inside the family. But suddenly, silence felt cowardly. Upstairs in her room later that night, Maya sat editing campaign notes while Jasper slept beside her desk. Her phone buzzed with a message from Adrian. Still awake? She stared at the screen for a second before replying. Usually. A few minutes later, coffee? 40 minutes later, Maya found herself sitting across from Adrian inside a tiny 24-hour cafe near Pike Place Market. The place smelled like cinnamon, espresso, and rain-soaked jackets. Most billionaires probably avoided places like this. Adrian seemed more comfortable there than at luxury restaurants. The elderly waitress behind the counter smiled warmly while refilling their coffee. Her name tag read Margaret. She was probably close to 70, with soft wrinkles around kind eyes and silver curls tucked beneath a faded red scarf. Years of working late-night shifts had given her the ability to recognize lonely people almost instantly. "You two working late again?" Margaret asked. Adrian nodded slightly. Margaret smiled at Maya. "You look less tired tonight." The comment surprised her. People usually noticed her work, not her exhaustion. After Margaret walked away, Adrian studied Maya quietly across the table. "You notice people most others ignore," he said. Maya stirred her coffee slowly. "Invisible people usually do." Again, that sadness underneath the sentence. Adrian had heard it before. He leaned back slightly. Claire ran a background review on everyone joining the campaign division. Maya looked up, not offended, just cautious. Adrian continued calmly. "You worked 3 jobs during college?" Her expression changed instantly. "You graduated debt-free while living in one of Seattle's wealthiest neighborhoods," he added quietly. "That doesn't make sense." Maya looked down at her coffee. Outside, rain tapped softly against cafe windows while passing headlights moved through the darkness. For a long moment, she said nothing. Adrian watched her carefully, not with judgment, with curiosity, because suddenly the puzzle pieces were becoming clearer. The expensive house, the guarded personality, the constant self-reliance, the fear of taking credit. And underneath all of it, pain she tried very hard to hide. Finally, Adrian spoke softly. "Why do you still stay kind to people who hurt you?" Maya stopped moving completely. The question landed deeper than he realized. And for the first time since Adrian Hayes entered her life, Maya Carter didn't know how to answer. The woman he chose. Seattle's winter slowly gave way to early spring, though the skies remained gray more often than blue. Rain still washed across the city almost every evening, coating the streets in silver reflections and neon light. Over the next several months, Maya Carter's life changed so gradually that sometimes she barely noticed it happening, until she stopped one day and realized she no longer felt invisible all the time. The biggest difference was Adrian. Not because he was wealthy, not because of his influence, but because he listened, really listened. And once someone spends their entire life being ignored, being heard can feel dangerously close to falling in love. Most nights, Maya and Adrian worked late inside Hayes Digital's private strategy division. Sometimes they sat inside glass conference rooms overlooking downtown Seattle. Other nights, they escaped the office entirely and worked from quiet cafes hidden between rainy side streets and bookstores near Pike Place Market. They rarely talked about luxury. They talked about people, about loneliness, fear, trust. Why some brands survived generations while others disappeared in months. Adrian often challenged Maya's thinking during brainstorming sessions, but never in a way meant to embarrass her. He pushed because he respected intelligence, and for the first time in her life, Maya found herself around someone who didn't make her feel small for being thoughtful. One rainy Friday night, they sat together in a nearly empty waterfront cafe while ferries moved slowly across Elliott Bay outside the windows. Soft jazz played overhead while the smell of coffee and sea salt filled the air. Adrian closed his laptop and studied her quietly. "You always talk about emotional memory like you've lived inside it." Maya looked down at the ceramic mug warming her hands. For a few seconds, she stayed silent. Then, slowly, she began talking. Not carefully this time, honestly. She told him about the Anderson house, about family dinners where she always sat at the far end of the table while guests praised Eleanor for being generous enough to adopt a black child, about being introduced as the girl we took in instead of daughter, about birthdays that felt more like obligations than celebrations. She described the attic bedroom, the second-hand clothes, the way Eleanor constantly reminded her she should feel grateful, even for basic kindness. Adrian listened without interrupting once. Maya stared out toward the dark water beyond the windows. "I spent years trying to become useful enough to deserve staying there," she admitted quietly. The sentence hit harder than she intended. Adrian's jaw tightened slightly, not from pity, from anger. Not at Maya, at the people who had taught her to think love needed to be earned. She gave a small laugh after a moment, though sadness lingered behind it. "The strange part is, they never hit me. They never screamed at me, so sometimes I wondered if maybe I was overreacting." Adrian leaned forward slowly. "No," he said firmly. "You weren't." Maya looked at him. His expression never softened into sympathy. It became something deeper. Respect. Because surviving cruelty without becoming cruel yourself required a kind of strength Adrian rarely saw in anyone, especially people raised around privilege. Over the following weeks, their relationship slowly shifted beyond work, though neither of them said it out loud at first. Adrian began memorizing small things about her, the way she always gave cash tips to exhausted waitresses, how she instinctively noticed lonely people sitting alone in public places, how she apologized before taking up space in conversations. Maya noticed things too, how Adrian quietly sent expensive meals to overworked employees without taking credit, how he stayed calm during conflicts that made other executives panic, how loneliness followed him even inside crowded rooms. Money had made him admired, not understood. One afternoon, Maya arrived at Hayes Tower to find Sophia unexpectedly waiting near the lobby cafe downstairs. Sophia looked dramatically different from her usual casual social media image. She wore a fitted, cream-colored designer coat, expensive heels, and makeup carefully styled to look effortless. Over the past month, she had become increasingly obsessed with the world surrounding Adrian Hayes, and especially the people inside it. "Oh my God, there you are," Sophia said brightly, standing up quickly. "I was nearby." Maya already knew that was a lie. Sophia smiled while glancing around the luxury lobby. "This place is incredible." Before Maya could answer, two sharply dressed women walked past the cafe entrance, laughing together. Sophia immediately recognized them from Adrian's social circle online. One of them was Vanessa Laurent, a fashion entrepreneur and influencer from Manhattan, known for appearing at elite charity galas and celebrity events. Tall, glamorous, with platinum blonde hair and icy confidence, Vanessa represented the exact type of woman Sophia admired. Sophia instantly straightened her posture, then casually stepped into their path. "Sorry," she said with practiced charm. "Aren't you Vanessa Laurent?" Maya watched the entire interaction silently. Sophia's smile became brighter, more polished, almost desperate. For the first time, Maya fully realized something painful. Sophia did not actually want connection. She wanted proximity to status. Later that night, Eleanor unexpectedly stopped Maya near the staircase after dinner. Eleanor stood holding a wine glass, studying her carefully. "You've been out late a lot recently." Maya remained calm. "Work's busy." "With Hayes Digital?" "Yes." Eleanor tilted her head slightly. "People online seem very interested in Adrian Hayes lately." There it was. Suspicion. Maya knew Eleanor well enough to recognize it immediately. Not concern. Calculation. "You should be careful," Eleanor continued lightly. "Men like that attract attention." Maya met her eyes quietly. "I'm aware." For a moment, Eleanor seemed almost unsettled by Maya's confidence, because confidence was new. Upstairs, Ryan overheard part of the conversation again, and unlike before, this time he walked downstairs. "Maya earned everything happening to her," he said suddenly. The room went quiet. Eleanor blinked in surprise. Ryan rarely challenged anyone directly. Richard lowered his newspaper slowly. Ryan looked toward Maya. "You worked harder than anybody in this house." Sophia scoffed from the couch. "Why are you acting like she cured cancer?" Ryan turned sharply toward her. "Because she deserved better than how all of you treated her." The silence afterward felt heavy. Maya herself looked shocked. Ryan had never defended her openly before. Not like this. And for the first time since entering the Anderson family years ago, someone inside the house sounded genuinely ashamed. Months passed. Spring finally arrived in Seattle, bringing softer rain and warmer evenings. Publicly, Maya and Adrian still kept their relationship almost completely private. Adrian hated media attention surrounding his personal life, and Maya had no interest in becoming internet gossip. That privacy made what happened next feel even more meaningful. On a quiet evening near Lake Washington, Adrian invited Maya to walk with him along the waterfront after dinner. The city lights reflected softly across the dark water while cold wind moved gently through the trees nearby. No cameras, no bodyguards following closely, no reporters, just silence and peace. Maya wore a long dark coat while her curls moved softly in the breeze. Adrian walked beside her with both hands in his pockets, unusually quiet. Eventually they stopped near the edge of the water. The lake stretched endlessly beneath the night sky. Adrian turned toward her slowly. For a second, Maya thought he was about to say something business-related. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket. Her breath caught immediately. "No," she whispered softly in shock. Adrian gave the smallest smile, then knelt carefully on one knee. The world suddenly felt completely silent around them. "Maya," he said quietly, "I spent most of my life believing survival mattered more than kindness." Emotion tightened his voice slightly. "Then I met you." Tears immediately filled Maya's eyes. Adrian looked directly at her. "I've never met someone who stayed gentle after surviving so much." He opened the small velvet ring box slowly. The diamond inside reflected city lights across the lake, and somehow the ring itself felt less overwhelming than the sincerity in his voice. "Marry me." Maya covered her mouth with trembling fingers, not because of the money, not because Adrian Hayes was famous, but because for the first time in her life, someone was choosing her completely. "Yes," she whispered through tears. "Yes." Adrian stood and pulled her into his arms while Seattle's lights shimmered across the water behind them. Far away from cameras, far away from judgment, it was the safest Maya had ever felt in another human being's arms. 2 weeks later, elegant black and gold wedding invitations arrived at the Anderson estate. Sophia opened the envelope first while sitting at the kitchen island. At first, she smiled casually, then suddenly froze. Her face lost color. "What?" Eleanor asked. Sophia slowly turned the invitation around. Richard looked over her shoulder, then stood up immediately. The entire room went silent, because printed in gold lettering beside Maya Carter's name were 2 words none of them expected to see: Adrian Hayes. And for the very first time, the Anderson family realized exactly who Maya had become. Everything changed overnight. The Anderson house had always been obsessed with appearances. But after the wedding invitation arrived, appearances suddenly became survival. For 2 straight days, Eleanor Anderson barely spoke about anything else. The elegant white envelope with Adrian Hayes' name embossed in gold lettering remained on the kitchen counter like a loaded weapon nobody fully understood how to handle. By the 3rd morning, everything inside the house had changed. Not slowly. Immediately. Maya noticed it the moment she walked downstairs before work. "Good morning, sweetheart." She stopped halfway down the staircase. Eleanor stood near the dining table arranging flowers in a crystal vase, smiling too carefully. Her voice sounded softer than usual, almost practiced. Maya could not remember the last time Eleanor had called her sweetheart. Maybe never. Sophia looked up from her phone with exaggerated excitement. "Mom was just saying we should all do dinner together this weekend, like a real family dinner." Maya stayed quiet. The sudden warmth in the room felt less comforting than unsettling. Richard Anderson folded his newspaper slowly and forced a smile toward her. "You should have told us sooner about Adrian." There it was. Not happiness, not apology. Status recognition. Maya picked up her coffee mug calmly. There wasn't really anything to announce before. Sophia laughed lightly. "Maya, come on. You're literally marrying one of the most famous billionaires in America." The sentence still sounded unreal sometimes, not because Adrian felt unreal to her, but because everyone else reacted to him like he belonged to another universe. Maya grabbed her coat quietly. "I'm going to work." Eleanor immediately stepped forward. "Wait, maybe we could all have dinner tonight? Your father misses spending time together." Maya almost looked behind herself to check whether another daughter had entered the room, but instead of reacting emotionally, she simply nodded politely. Maybe. That answer alone disappointed them, because they expected resentment, anger, some kind of emotional revenge, but Maya gave them nothing, and somehow that made the guilt inside the house feel even heavier. By afternoon, Sophia's Instagram page looked completely different. Gone were most of the luxury selfies and influencer poses. Now her account suddenly featured childhood pictures with Maya. One showed Maya at age 12 helping decorate a Christmas tree while Sophia smiled beside her. Caption, "So proud of my sister. Family always comes first." Another post followed 2 hours later. "Watching my sister succeed has been inspiring." Ryan nearly threw his phone across the room when he saw it, because he remembered those moments. The Christmas photo had been taken 10 minutes after Sophia screamed at Maya for accidentally breaking an ornament. The inspiring sister had spent years eating dinner alone upstairs. Ryan stared at the screen with growing disgust. For the first time in his life, he realized something disturbing about his family. They did not change when Maya suffered. They changed when powerful people started watching. Meanwhile, online attention around Maya intensified daily. Adrian Hayes had kept their engagement mostly private, but secrecy only made the media more aggressive. Articles began appearing across entertainment and business websites. Who is Adrian Hayes' fiancé? The mystery woman who captured the tech billionaire. From unknown assistant to future billionaire's wife. Reporters began digging through Maya's past. Old classmates posted yearbook photos. Former college coworkers gave interviews describing how Maya worked exhausting overnight shifts while studying full-time. One interview especially caught public attention. A former diner manager named Teresa Alvarez appeared in a local Seattle news segment. Teresa was a short Latina woman in her 60s with warm brown eyes and deep forehead wrinkles earned from decades of hard work. She had once managed a 24-hour diner near Maya's college campus. "She was the hardest working girl I ever hired," Teresa said during the interview. Sometimes she'd finish a night shift at 4 a.m. and still go straight to class smiling. The internet loved the story, but Maya hated the attention. One evening, she sat inside Adrian's penthouse overlooking Seattle while dozens of news alerts flooded her phone. "This is getting out of control," she muttered softly. Adrian stood nearby, removing his suit jacket after returning from New York. "You didn't do anything wrong." "I know, I just—" She exhaled tiredly. "I don't like strangers talking about my life like they know me." Adrian walked closer slowly, then stopped reading it. Simple answer, typical Adrian. Maya smiled faintly, but Adrian noticed something else underneath her anxiety. Fear, not fear of fame, fear of exposure. As if somewhere deep inside, Maya still believed people would stop loving her if they saw too much of her real life. That thought stayed with him long after the conversation ended. A week later, Ryan arrived unexpectedly at Adrian's penthouse carrying an old storage box. The doorman almost refused to let him upstairs until Maya personally approved it. When Ryan entered the apartment, he looked visibly uncomfortable. The penthouse itself was breathtaking. Dark marble floors, floor-to-ceiling glass walls overlooking the Seattle skyline, modern artwork hanging beneath warm lighting. Everything looked elegant without feeling cold. Ryan shifted awkwardly while holding the box. "I found some old family videos in the garage," he said quietly. Maya frowned slightly. "Why bring them here?" Ryan hesitated, then glanced briefly toward Adrian standing nearby. "Because I think he should see them." Maya immediately stiffened. "No." But Ryan shook his head slowly. "Maya, he deserves to know." Adrian stayed silent during the entire exchange, which usually meant he was paying very close attention. Eventually, Maya looked away first. Ryan opened the box and removed several old digital tapes along with hard drive files he had converted earlier. The first few clips looked harmless enough. Christmas mornings, birthdays, family vacations. But slowly, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Maya cleaning dishes in the background while everyone else opened presents. Maya carrying luggage during trips while Sophia posed for photos. Maya serving drinks during a garden party while Eleanor introduced Sophia proudly to guests. Then came the video that changed everything. The footage looked casual at first. A charity dinner hosted at the Anderson house nearly 8 years earlier. Guests laughed around the dining room while classical music played softly in the background. Young Maya, barely 18, moved quietly between tables carrying trays of food. One woman in the video suddenly asked Eleanor, "Oh, is she part of the catering staff?" Eleanor laughed lightly, then answered, "No, that's just Maya. She's always helping around the house." The room on screen laughed politely. Nobody corrected the misunderstanding. Nobody said daughter. Nobody even looked embarrassed. Inside the penthouse, silence became suffocating. Adrian stared at the frozen screen. His expression changed slowly. Not shock, not sadness. Rage, cold rage, the kind that becomes dangerous because it stays controlled. Maya looked down immediately, ashamed in a way she hated herself for feeling. Ryan swallowed hard. "There's more." There was. Video after video revealed the same thing. Years of emotional humiliation disguised as normal family behavior. Nothing dramatic enough for headlines. Nothing illegal. Just constant reminders that Maya existed outside the family instead of inside it. Adrian finally spoke without taking his eyes off the screen. "How long?" Maya's voice came quietly. "Most of my life." Adrian turned toward her sharply. "And nobody said anything?" Ryan answered before she could. "I should have." The guilt in his voice sounded genuine. Adrian looked back toward the screen again. His jaw tightened visibly. For the first time since Maya met him, he looked truly furious. Not billionaire irritated, not corporate angry, personal. Because suddenly he understood why Maya apologized before expressing opinions. Why she acted uncomfortable receiving kindness. Why compliments made her nervous. They had trained her to believe she should feel grateful for being tolerated. Adrian closed the laptop slowly. "That's not family," he said coldly. Maya stayed silent. Part of her wanted to defend them automatically. Years of survival had built that instinct deep inside her. But another part of her was simply exhausted. Adrian stood near the windows overlooking Seattle's glowing skyline while tension filled the room behind him. Ryan quietly gathered the old tapes again. "I'm sorry," he whispered toward Maya, and for the first time ever, Maya believed he truly meant it. 3 nights later, disaster struck the Anderson family without warning. Richard Anderson sat pale-faced at the dining table while financial documents covered every surface around him. Eleanor stood nearby gripping a wine glass so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Sophia looked terrified. Ryan had never seen his father look old before. Until now. Richard finally lowered the phone slowly after a long conversation with someone from the bank. "What happened?" Eleanor asked quietly. Richard stared blankly at the papers, then answered with 2 words that changed everything. "We're bankrupt." The room fell completely silent. The apology at the penthouse door. Rain hammered against the windows of the Anderson mansion for nearly 3 straight days after Richard Anderson announced the company's collapse. Seattle's gray sky seemed heavier than usual, pressing cold silence into every room of the house. The expensive furniture, polished marble floors, and carefully framed family photographs suddenly felt fragile now that money could no longer protect the illusions surrounding them. For the first time in years, fear lived openly inside the Anderson home. Real fear, not embarrassment, not social discomfort. Survival. Richard barely slept anymore. Deep purple shadows formed beneath his eyes as he spent entire nights buried beneath contracts, debt notices, and emergency meetings with attorneys. His company, Anderson Financial Consulting, had lost 2 major corporate clients within the same quarter, and a risky investment partnership in California had quietly destroyed what little stability remained. The banks wanted payment immediately, and they wanted the house as collateral. Eleanor stopped hosting lunches with friends. Sophia stopped posting luxury photos online. Even the atmosphere at dinner changed completely. Nobody argued anymore. Nobody joked. The family moved around each other like strangers trapped inside the same sinking ship. But despite everything happening, nobody called Maya, not at first, because asking for help meant admitting something unbearable. The daughter they treated like an outsider had become the only powerful person connected to the family. One afternoon, Ryan found Sophia crying quietly in the living room while staring at her phone screen. Her mascara had smudged beneath swollen eyes, and her usually perfect appearance looked unusually fragile. For the first time in years, Sophia resembled someone younger than her age instead of older. Social media had always been her source of confidence, validation, even identity. Now it was turning against her. "What happened?" Ryan asked carefully. Sophia gave a bitter laugh without looking up. "People found the old videos." Ryan immediately understood. Clips from the Anderson family events had started resurfacing online after several gossip accounts connected Maya's past to Adrian Hayes. Internet users began analyzing every interaction in old footage, and they noticed everything. The way Maya carried plates while everyone else ate. The way Eleanor introduced her differently. The way Sophia spoke to her. Comment sections became brutal overnight. Fake sister. Using Maya for clout. She treated her horribly before the billionaire. Sophia threw her phone onto the couch angrily. "They're acting like I'm some monster." Ryan looked at her for a long moment before answering quietly. "You weren't very nice to her." The truth landed harder than shouting would have. Sophia wiped her face quickly. "You think I don't know that now?" For once, there was no arrogance in her voice, only panic. And shame. Across town, Maya stood inside Hayes Digital's Manhattan branch office, reviewing campaign analytics while thunder rolled beyond the skyscrapers outside. She had temporarily relocated to New York with Adrian for several weeks during the company's national expansion meetings. The Manhattan office felt colder than Seattle's version. Larger, sharper, faster. Executives moved through hallways like predators hunting opportunities. Nobody walked slowly there. Claire Donovan entered Maya's office carrying a tablet and coffee. "You've been staring at the same report for 20 minutes, Claire observed. Maya sighed softly. "I'm thinking." Claire set the coffee down. "About your family." Maya looked up in mild surprise. Claire smirked slightly. "You get the same expression Adrian gets before major acquisitions." That comparison alone felt absurd to Maya. Claire leaned lightly against the doorway. "For what it's worth, most people with your history wouldn't even answer their calls." Maya looked back toward the rain-covered windows. "I know." The problem was, despite everything, part of her still loved them. Or maybe loved the idea of what family was supposed to mean. That evening, Adrian sat alone inside his private office, reviewing financial records connected to Richard Anderson's company. The deeper he looked, the worse the situation became. The company was collapsing faster than the family realized. A knock interrupted the silence. Ethan Brooks entered carrying several legal folders. Ethan was Adrian's corporate attorney, a tall black man in his 40s with calm eyes and an intimidatingly controlled voice. Years spent handling hostile billion-dollar negotiations had made Ethan emotionally unreadable in most situations. "You were right," Ethan said quietly. "The banks are preparing asset seizure filings." Adrian closed the file slowly. "How much debt?" Ethan named the number. Even Adrian looked unimpressed by how catastrophic it sounded. "Anderson won't survive 6 months," Ethan added. Silence filled the office. Then Adrian spoke without emotion. "Buy the debt." Ethan studied him carefully. "Personally or through the company?" "Personally." That answer mattered, because personal decisions were never about business. Ethan hesitated slightly. "You're doing this for Maya." Adrian didn't deny it. He simply looked back toward the rain outside Manhattan's skyline. "Quietly," he said. "I don't want her knowing yet." 3 nights later, Eleanor Anderson stood beneath heavy rain outside Adrian's Manhattan penthouse building with trembling hands wrapped around her coat. She had almost turned around twice before entering. The doorman upstairs nearly refused to let her through. Not because she looked poor, because she looked broken. When the penthouse elevator doors finally opened, Maya froze instantly. Eleanor stood there soaked from the storm. No makeup, no polished smile, no social mask. For the first time in Maya's life, her adoptive mother looked small. Adrian appeared silently from the hallway behind Maya but said nothing. He simply watched. Waiting. Eleanor stepped inside slowly, eyes moving around the enormous penthouse before landing back on Maya. For several painful seconds, nobody spoke. Then Eleanor whispered the words Maya never truly expected to hear. "I'm sorry?" Maya's breath caught slightly. Eleanor's voice shook. "I should have protected you better." Tears filled her eyes almost immediately, and instead, "I made you feel unwanted in your own home." The silence afterward felt unbearable, because apologies sound very different when pride finally dies inside them. Maya stared at the woman who had spent years reminding her to feel grateful for basic acceptance. Now Eleanor looked terrified, not socially embarrassed, emotionally exposed. "I thought providing for you was enough," Eleanor admitted quietly. "I didn't realize how much damage silence could do." Behind Maya, Adrian remained completely still, but Eleanor could feel his presence. And somehow, that made the moment even harder. Because the powerful billionaire watching silently behind Maya represented everything Eleanor had failed to see years earlier. Maya had value long before Adrian Hayes entered her life. Nobody in the room spoke for several seconds. Finally, Eleanor whispered, "We're losing the house." There it was, the truth, raw, humiliating, human. Maya closed her eyes briefly. She could say no. Nobody would blame her, not Adrian, not Ryan, not even strangers online. After everything they had done to her, walking away would have been understandable. But Maya slowly opened her eyes again, and the anger everyone expected from her simply wasn't there. Only sadness. Ryan arrived later that night after Eleanor finally admitted where she had gone. When Maya opened the door for him, he immediately looked down in guilt. "I should have said something years ago," he admitted quietly once they sat together in the penthouse living room. "Every time they treated you differently. I saw it." Maya stayed silent. Ryan rubbed both hands together nervously. "I kept telling myself staying quiet avoided conflict, but honestly," he swallowed hard, "I was just a coward." The honesty in his voice hurt more than excuses would have. Maya looked at him gently. "You were a kid, too." "No," Ryan said immediately, "not near the end." For the first time, Maya saw how much guilt he had been carrying alone. Across the room, Adrian quietly watched the conversation while speaking on the phone with Ethan Brooks. "Yes," he said calmly. "Move forward with the acquisition." Maya looked over. Acquisition? Adrian ended the call smoothly. Nothing important? But she knew that expression. Something was already happening behind the scenes. The next several weeks became the busiest period of Maya's life. Because instead of simply paying the Anderson debt, she made a completely different decision. She decided to rebuild the company itself. Most financial advisors believed Anderson Financial Consulting was beyond saving. The company's public image looked outdated, elitist, emotionally disconnected from younger clients. Maya saw something else, a branding problem, not just a financial one. She rebuilt everything from the ground up. New messaging, new visual identity, new client strategy. Instead of pretending the company had never failed, Maya transformed the collapse into a campaign about transparency, rebuilding trust, and helping struggling small businesses recover financially after economic hardship. People connected to it immediately, especially after Maya insisted the company publicly acknowledge mistakes instead of hiding them. Richard himself appeared in a video campaign admitting failure honestly for the first time in his career. The internet reacted unexpectedly well. Then, major business pages started sharing the campaign. Then, local news stations. Then, national media. Within weeks, client inquiries tripled. Investors returned. The company stopped collapsing. Late one evening, Maya stood inside the newly redesigned Anderson Company office watching employees work behind glass conference rooms glowing beneath city lights. Richard approached her slowly. He looked older now. Softer, too. I spent years believing success came from protecting pride, he admitted quietly. Maya looked at him. Richard's voice lowered. You saved this company using the same skills I once laughed at. For once, there was no defense left in him. Only truth, and outside the office windows, Seattle's skyline glowed beneath the rain, while the company everyone believed was doomed slowly came back to life. The place she finally belonged. 1 year later, Seattle looked different to Maya Carter. Or maybe that she was the one who had changed. Spring sunlight reflected across glass skyscrapers downtown, while ferries moved slowly through Elliott Bay beneath clear blue skies. The endless gray rain that once seemed permanent had finally given way to warmth, color, and movement. Streets overflowed with people carrying coffee cups, laughing outside cafes, walking dogs through crowded sidewalks. Life kept moving, and for the first time in a very long time, Maya no longer felt like she was running just to survive it. The transformation of Anderson Financial Consulting became one of Seattle's biggest business comeback stories of the year. Business magazines called it the rebuild nobody expected. Marketing conferences invited Maya to speak about emotional branding, corporate transparency, and consumer trust. Universities studied her campaign strategy in business courses, but despite everything public life had changed around her, the quietest changes mattered most. Ryan Anderson now lived in a modest apartment across the city near Capitol Hill. Compared to the mansion where he grew up, the apartment looked painfully small. Exposed brick walls, secondhand furniture, tiny kitchen counters barely large enough for two people to stand beside each other. Ryan loved it, because for the first time in his life, something belonged to him instead of his family's reputation. Over the past year, he had quietly used part of his inheritance to launch a nonprofit foundation supporting adopted children who aged out of unstable foster systems. The organization started small. Counseling services, emergency housing support, educational grants. But stories spread quickly online after several teenagers publicly shared how Ryan personally helped them. One afternoon, Maya visited the foundation's small downtown office. Children's drawings covered one wall beside shelves filled with donated books and winter coats. Ryan stood near the reception desk helping a teenage boy fill out scholarship paperwork. The boy looked nervous and withdrawn, maybe 16 years old, with tired eyes and oversized clothes hanging loosely from his thin frame. Ryan spoke gently while explaining the forms. No pressure, okay? We'll figure it out step by step. Maya watched quietly from the doorway. Years earlier, Ryan probably would have avoided emotional situations completely. Now, he leaned toward them. After the teenager left, Ryan rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. "I still don't know what I'm doing half the time." Maya smiled softly. "Most people helping others don't." Ryan looked around the office. "I kept thinking about you growing up," he admitted quietly, "about how different things could have felt if somebody had stepped in sooner." Maya touched his shoulder gently. This time, the guilt in him no longer felt useless. Across town, Sophia Anderson sat inside a crowded community center helping organize donated clothing for women escaping domestic violence shelters. If someone had told Sophia 2 years earlier she would spend weekends folding donated sweaters instead of posting luxury selfies online, she would have laughed at them. Now, she barely posted online at all, not because the internet forced her to change, because embarrassment had finally stripped away the version of herself built entirely around appearances. A middle-aged volunteer named Denise Harper worked beside her sorting winter jackets. Denise was a broad-shouldered black woman in her 50s with short silver hair and a deep, calming voice shaped by years of working as a social worker in difficult neighborhoods. "You're getting faster," Denise observed casually. Sophia laughed softly. "A year ago, I didn't even know how to fold sheets correctly." Denise smirked. "Growth usually starts after humiliation." Sophia looked down quietly. That sentence hit closer than Denise realized. At first, Sophia volunteered only because public backlash destroyed her social image after the videos involving Maya resurfaced online. She wanted redemption. But over time, something uncomfortable happened. She began meeting people with real pain. Women abandoned by families, teenagers with nowhere to sleep, children who apologized every time they accepted food because they were scared of being too much trouble. And slowly, Sophia realized how shallow her entire world had been. One rainy afternoon months earlier, she had quietly apologized to Maya without cameras or dramatic speeches. Not because it fixed the past, because pretending anymore felt exhausting. Meanwhile, Adrian and Maya spent most of the year expanding the Hayes Emotional Marketing Scholarship Program, a national scholarship initiative designed specifically for Black students pursuing careers in branding, media psychology, and creative marketing. The first scholarship ceremony took place at the University of Washington. Hundreds attended. Students, professors, journalists, young creators who grew up believing corporate marketing spaces were never built for people like them. Before Maya stepped onto the stage, she stood quietly backstage adjusting the sleeve of her navy dress. Adrian approached from behind. "You nervous?" She gave a small smile. "A little." Adrian studied her for a moment. Even now, after everything they built together, Maya still carried traces of the quiet girl who once apologized for existing too loudly, but not as much anymore. "You know," Adrian said calmly, "half the people out there think you're intimidating." Maya looked shocked. "Me?" He nodded. "You survived things that break most people." The ceremony itself became emotional quickly. Several scholarship recipients openly spoke about growing up overlooked, underestimated, or excluded from opportunities because of race or financial background. One student especially stayed in Maya's mind afterward. Her name was Alana Brooks, an 18-year-old black freshman from Detroit with natural curls tied into a loose bun and nervous hands constantly twisting together while speaking. Alana admitted she almost gave up applying after reading online comments claiming students like her only succeeded because of diversity programs. Maya looked directly at her while answering. "Never let people confuse your opportunity with charity," she said firmly. "You belong in every room your talent takes you into." The applause afterward lasted nearly a minute. That night, the Anderson family gathered for dinner together for the first time in over a year. Not a staged holiday event, not a public appearance, just dinner. Real dinner. The dining room looked almost identical to how it always had, warm lighting, polished silverware, soft music drifting from hidden speakers, yet somehow the atmosphere felt completely different. Because one thing had changed. Honesty, finally lived there now. Maya entered beside Adrian and paused slightly when she saw the seating arrangement. Her place sat at the center of the table. Not the edge, not near the kitchen, the center. For a moment nobody spoke, then Eleanor quietly smiled. Not performative this time, just emotional. "You should sit," she said softly. Maya slowly took the seat, and something unexpectedly painful tightened in her chest. Because part of her still remembered the little girl who used to wonder what it felt like to belong there. Dinner moved quietly at first. Conversation stayed gentle, careful, almost fragile. But unlike previous years, nobody ignored Maya. Nobody interrupted her. Nobody treated her like temporary company inside someone else's home. Halfway through dinner, Richard Anderson suddenly stood from his chair holding a glass in trembling hands. His hair had become noticeably grayer over the past year. Success disappearing had humbled him faster than age ever could. He looked toward Maya for several long seconds before speaking. "The person we treated like she didn't belong," his voice weakened slightly, "was the one who taught us what family really means." Silence filled the room instantly. Sophia lowered her eyes. Eleanor looked close to tears. Ryan stared quietly at the table, because nobody there could deny the truth anymore. Maya looked around the room slowly, at the people who once made her feel invisible, at the table where she spent years sitting quietly at the edge while pretending not to notice the difference between herself and everyone else. And suddenly, for the first time in her entire life, she no longer felt like the outsider in the family photograph. Later that night, Maya stood alone on the rooftop terrace of the Manhattan penthouse, while Seattle's skyline glowed brilliantly beneath the night sky. Cold wind moved gently through her curls as traffic lights shimmered far below like rivers of gold and white. Behind her, the terrace door opened softly. Adrian stepped outside carrying 2 cups of coffee. Without speaking, he wrapped one arm gently around her waist. Maya leaned back against him automatically. Comfort had once felt unfamiliar. Now it felt safe. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Adrian finally said quietly, "You know what made me fall in love with you?" Maya smiled faintly. "My marketing strategies?" He laughed softly. "No." She turned slightly toward him. Adrian looked out across the city lights. "I've met brilliant people before," he said, "powerful people too, but after everything they did to you—" His voice lowered gently. "You still chose kindness." Maya looked down quietly. Adrian touched her hand softly. "That's rare." Emotion tightened unexpectedly inside her chest. Because all her life, people treated kindness like weakness. Adrian treated it like strength. The wind moved softly around them while Seattle shimmered endlessly below. And standing there in Adrian's arms, surrounded by the city that once made her feel invisible, Maya Carter realized something beautiful. For the first time in her life, she finally had a home. At the end of this story, the biggest lesson was never really about money, success, or marrying a billionaire. It was about how deeply people can be hurt when they are constantly treated like they do not belong. In everyday life, this happens more often than we realize. Sometimes it is the quiet child in the family, the coworker nobody listens to, the student sitting alone, the person who keeps smiling while carrying years of invisible pain. Maya's story reminds us that emotional cruelty does not always come through yelling or violence. Sometimes it comes through silence, exclusion, humiliation, or making someone feel less than day after day. And sadly, many people only start showing respect when success, fame, or money enters the picture. But a person's value should never depend on status, race, appearance, or what they can do for us. What made Maya truly powerful was not her success. It was her decision not to let pain turn her into a cruel person. In a world that often rewards ego, anger, and pride, kindness has become one of the rarest forms of strength. So if this story touched your heart, take a moment today to think about the people around you. Speak kindly, Listen carefully. Treat people with dignity before the world tells you they are important. Because the person being ignored today may be carrying a heart stronger than anyone realizes. And if you're someone who has ever felt rejected, underestimated, or unwanted, do not give up on yourself. God sees the pain nobody else notices. Sometimes your hardest years are preparing you for the place where you finally belong. If you believe kindness is still powerful in this world, leave an amen in the comments. Share this story with someone who needs encouragement today. Subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories that inspire compassion, justice, and hope. May God bless you, protect your family, heal every hidden wound in your life, and guide you toward people who truly see your worth.